August 7th, 1942. Guadalcanal. The relentless heat of the Pacific sun beats down on the beach, casting long shadows across the jungle. The air is thick with humidity, salty from the crashing waves and the scent of earth and decay. The ocean roars in the distance, a constant reminder of the vastness of the Pacific. But here, on this stretch of land, history is about to be made. Japanese troops land, their boots sinking into the sand. Their confidence is palpable. The island seems like nothing more than an obstacle, a simple piece of land to secure, a small victory in a much larger campaign. As they march forward, there is a sense of quiet arrogance. The jungle stretches out before them, vast and untamed, but it appears calm, deceivingly manageable. They don't see it yet. One soldier laughs, staring out at the dense green expanse. His voice is light, dismissive. It's just another island, he thinks. The jungle can't stop us. What he doesn't know is that beneath his feet, the land is already conspiring against him. The jungle, which he believes to be nothing more than an obstacle, is about to become his prison. The terrain, which seems like an innocent challenge, is about to reveal its true face, a deadly force of nature, a cunning predator lying in wait. And what they couldn't possibly know as they set foot on this island is that this moment will be their undoing. That in the days to come, they will come to understand that the very land they stand on will turn against them in ways they can't yet comprehend. What begins as a calm and confident advance will spiral into a battle of survival, a fight against an enemy they cannot see, a kill box they cannot escape. What they don't know is that on this day, they're witnessing the beginning of their defeat, the beginning of the end.
In the early days of the Pacific War, victory was elusive, and the enemy seemed everywhere. As the Japanese pushed deeper into the Solomon Islands, they were met with the realization that not all threats could be faced with firepower alone. Guadalcanal, a lush jungle island, offered no simple solution. The terrain was as much a part of the enemy's defenses as the soldiers themselves. And so, the Allies began to adapt, to think differently. In the heart of the jungle, a new idea began to form. It wasn't a weapon, at least not in the traditional sense. It wasn't a plane or a tank. It was something far more insidious, a strategy, a series of traps designed not to engage in open combat, but to manipulate the very environment itself. The enemy would not see it coming, and they would not leave alive. But like all new ideas, it was met with skepticism. Those who saw it as a viable option were questioned. Could this work? Could they really trap a modern military force, one that had already proven itself deadly, with something as simple as the jungle itself? Engineers, soldiers, and strategists grappled with the concept, tinkering with designs and strategies, facing failure after failure. The early trials were a disaster. The first traps failed to even trigger. The camouflage was too obvious. The machines, designed to explode on command, malfunctioned. There were casualties. The costs seemed too high. Yet, in the failures, there was something else, a seed of potential. They learned from each mistake. The traps were refined. The camouflage grew more effective. The explosive charges became more precise. The engineers, their backs against the wall, pushed forward, undeterred by their setbacks. It was a slow, painstaking process, but with each failure, the plan grew stronger. The jungle, once a terrifying maze, became a weapon. The invisible kill box began to take shape.
What seemed like a reckless, doomed attempt was slowly transforming into something far more dangerous, a weapon of silence and terror, something that didn't rely on brute force, but on the patience of the jungle itself. And what had once been dismissed as an impossible venture was now evolving into a lethal tactic, one that would change the course of the war. Nobody understood it yet, but what started as a series of failures born out of necessity and desperation was now on the cusp of becoming a monster, a killer in the underbrush, waiting to unleash its fury.
The first true test of this new strategy came quickly, faster than anyone had expected. The enemy was closing in, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. The jungle, which had once seemed like an ally, now felt like a vast, uncharted battleground, a place where nothing was predictable. The traps, still in their infancy, had to prove themselves. The plan was simple. The enemy would march through the dense foliage, and as they did, they would trigger the traps. Explosions, snares, pitfalls designed to break their ranks and shatter their confidence. But when the moment came, the plan faltered. The traps, though deadly in theory, were clumsy in execution. Many didn't activate at all. Some malfunctioned, sending shrapnel into the wrong places, injuring Allied soldiers instead. The camouflage failed in parts. The Japanese saw the hidden wires, the broken branches, the telltale signs of human interference. Their advance slowed, but not in the way it was intended. For hours, the jungle seemed alive with chaos. The Allies, watching from the shadows, could hear the faint crunch of boots, the movement of the enemy through the thick underbrush. The ambushes, the very traps that had been designed to ensnare the invaders, became traps for their own men. The initial wave of attacks ended in confusion. Soldiers retreating, some in fear, others disoriented by the noise and confusion. The first real clash had been a failure. The Japanese forces pushed forward, undeterred. The initial reports came back with blunt words. The traps are ineffective. The enemy is still advancing. The jungle is not enough. The commanding officers, hearing this, could not hide their disappointment. The first real test of the strategy had ended in humiliation. What was supposed to be a secret weapon had proven to be a costly mistake. But the worst blow came from the soldiers themselves. There was no victory to show for all the risk, all the preparation. The jungle, once thought to be an ally, had turned into a vast and unpredictable battleground, a place where nothing was predictable. But the cost had been high. The potential was still there. The jungle had not given up its secrets, not yet. It had been a defeat, but in every failure there was a lesson, a mistake to learn from, a reason to push on. The war was far from over, and so too was the war for survival in the jungle.
In the wake of defeat, there was no time for self-pity, no room for regret. The jungle was unforgiving, and the enemy relentless. But in the quiet moments that followed the failure, a subtle shift began to take shape. The engineers, the soldiers, the strategists, they began to see something the initial failure had obscured, the potential that still lay hidden beneath the chaos. The traps had failed, but the concept had not. They could not abandon it, not yet. What seemed like simple blunders now revealed the key to success. The jungle had proven its power, but it had also shown its vulnerabilities. And so the work began again. It was the smallest adjustments that would make the difference. The wires, once visible, were camouflaged with greater precision. The explosive devices, erratic in their first tests, were recalibrated to trigger with deadly accuracy. New designs for concealed pits and snares were tested, ensuring they would catch even the most cautious of movements. The lessons of failure were etched into every decision, every modification, every trial. Slowly, the invisible kill box began to emerge, not as a collection of failed ideas, but as a carefully constructed death trap. But it wasn't just the weapons that evolved. The soldiers themselves, those who had once questioned the effectiveness of the strategy, now understood the power of patience. They began to think like the jungle, to understand its rhythms, its flow, its chaos. They no longer relied solely on brute force or firepower. Instead, they embraced the art of ambush, the slow, methodical destruction of the enemy, piece by piece. They had learned, not from victory, but from failure. And with each lesson, the odds shifted. What had once seemed like a flawed concept now felt inevitable. The enemy would move through the jungle, and they would never see the trap coming. They would be caught in its invisible jaws without even realizing they had entered. It wasn't the firepower that made the strategy effective, it was the silence. The traps would no longer announce their presence with a loud crash or an obvious explosion. Instead, they would wait. They would breathe with the jungle, silent and still, until the moment was right. And then they would strike, swift and unseen. The jungle, once a symbol of uncertainty, now stood as a fortress for the Allies. And in that silence, in that stillness, the true power of the killbox began to reveal itself. What had seemed impossible, even laughable, was transforming into a weapon of terror. A weapon that could not be fought with guns or bombs, but with patience, with cunning, and with an intimate understanding of the land itself. The turn had come, not with a single battle, but with the quiet realization that the invisible had become the most potent weapon of all.
At first, the enemy laughed. They dismissed the jungle as a mere inconvenience, an obstacle to be cleared away, just another hurdle in their march to victory. But with each passing day, their confidence began to crack, and the terror they once ignored started to take root in their minds. What began as a series of isolated incidents soon snowballed into something far greater. The traps, silent and invisible, began to claim their first victims. An officer vanishes without a sound, no struggle, no warning. An entire patrol disappears into the underbrush, never to return. And always the same haunting silence that followed in their wake. The jungle swallowed them whole, and all the while the enemy remained unaware of the growing threat lurking in the shadows. The reports began to change. The initial disbelief, the dismissive attitude towards the so-called traps turned into something more urgent, more fearful. First came the confusion. What is happening to our men? Then came the horror. We cannot find them. There is no trace. The Japanese, once so sure of their superiority, began to realize that something more insidious than guns or bombs was working against them. The sound of a rifle shot, the roar of a plane, these were things they knew how to fight. But this was something else entirely. Something they could not see. Something they could not fight. The invisible kill box began to grow in power, each new attack a reminder of its deadly efficiency. The enemy's movements grew more cautious, more hesitant. They no longer marched through the jungle with the same arrogance. They moved slowly, looking over their shoulders, listening for sounds that might never come. A twig snapping, a shadow shifting. It all became a threat. The terror escalated in ways the Japanese had not anticipated. Men began to lose their grip on reality. The jungle itself became a prison, a place where even the bravest could not escape the fear of the unseen. Was it a trap? Was it just the jungle itself? The lines blurred. And as the days wore on, the once confident forces now moved in disarray. They began to fear not only the enemy, but the very land beneath their feet. The destruction was not just physical, it was psychological. The jungle was not a battleground anymore. It had become an execution chamber.
With every step they took, the enemy knew they were walking into a trap, but they could never know where it would spring. They would hear the faintest whisper of a branch snapping, or catch a glimpse of a shadow through the trees, but by then it was too late. The deadly snare had already closed around them. Reports came back from the front lines, each one more desperate than the last. "We've lost contact with half our men. There are too many of them. They know the jungle better than we do." The morale of the Japanese troops plummeted as the toll mounted. What was meant to be a quick victory turned into an enduring nightmare. The once proud and formidable forces began to lose hope. They had underestimated the power of what they couldn't see, and now they were paying the price. The very ground they had once confidently claimed as their own had become a weapon of terror. And the Allies, silent and invisible in their own way, were the ones wielding it. The enemy now understood the true nature of their foe. It was not just the jungle that threatened them. It was the Allies' ability to turn it into a killing field, a place where no one was safe and nothing could be trusted. The escalation of terror was unstoppable. Each day that passed, the kill box expanded, and as the Japanese forces withdrew, broken and terrified, the Allies knew that they had created something far more than a simple trap. They had created a nightmare, a force so silent and so invisible that the enemy could not even comprehend the full extent of their defeat.
What began as an experiment in survival had, over time, transformed into something much greater, something that would redefine the very nature of warfare. The kill box, an invisible web woven from the very fabric of the jungle itself, had become more than a trap. It had become a doctrine, a lesson in the power of adaptation, of using the land itself as a weapon. At its core, the doctrine was simple. The environment could be made to work for you, and in doing so, it could become an impenetrable fortress. The Allies had learned that brute force, while powerful, was not the only path to victory. It was the patience, the cunning, the ability to use what the enemy underestimated that had turned the tide. This was no longer just about destroying the enemy. It was about reshaping the battlefield. The jungle, once a deadly and unpredictable force, had become the ultimate ally. It had become a silent partner in the war effort, a strategic tool that the Japanese had failed to understand, a weapon that could not be countered by traditional means. The doctrine was not merely about physical warfare, it was about psychological warfare. The Japanese forces had been conditioned to expect the rules of conventional battle. They expected to see their enemy, to hear the sounds of gunfire, to engage in open combat. But the Allies had broken those rules. The traps didn't just kill, they sowed fear. They eroded the enemy's confidence, turning every step through the jungle into a moment of terror. The constant uncertainty, the never-ending threat of an invisible enemy wore down the will to fight. And as the morale of the Japanese soldiers crumbled, the Allies began to see a new kind of power emerge, not from tanks or aircraft, but from the ability to control the very environment itself. The lesson was clear. Power didn't always come from overwhelming force. It came from understanding. It came from using ingenuity to turn nature, to turn the landscape into an ally. The jungle, once a forbidding place, had become an extension of the will of the soldiers who fought within it. They had learned how to use it, how to bend it to their advantage, and in doing so, they had turned the tide of battle.
This was the essence of the new doctrine, a fusion of knowledge, terrain, and tactics that forced the enemy to play by a new set of rules. The jungle was no longer just a backdrop for war. It was a battleground in itself, a weapon to be wielded with precision and purpose. And the Allies, with their innovative approach, had shown that power lay not just in what was visible, but in what was invisible. What they had created was not just a weapon of war, it was a statement about the nature of conflict itself. It was about understanding that the enemy could be defeated not only with firepower, but with strategy, patience, and the ingenuity to turn every element of the battlefield to one's advantage. This doctrine, this new way of thinking, would be carried forward, reshaping how wars would be fought in the future. The jungle had become a symbol of this power. Its thick canopy, its treacherous terrain, had been transformed from a natural obstacle into an advantage. The Allies had harnessed the strength of nature itself, and in doing so, had rewritten the rules of warfare.
The Japanese had laughed when they first landed. They had walked with pride, certain of victory, unaware that the land beneath their feet was already a trap. For days, their confidence had been unshaken. They thought the jungle was theirs to conquer. But now, as the tide of battle turned against them, that laughter had faded into silence. One by one, the enemy forces fell into the invisible snare. They were swallowed by the jungle they had once thought to master, caught in the very traps they had dismissed. No artillery could break the hold of the earth beneath them. No tank could clear the paths of the hidden dangers that lay in wait. The jungle had become their executioner, the Allied forces its unseen hand. The enemy, once bold, now feared the land they had walked upon so confidently. The invisible traps had made cowards of them. What was once a force of unstoppable might had turned into a disjointed, terrified retreat. The jungle had become a prison, and within it the enemy was its most helpless captive. What had once been dismissed as a folly, a failure, was now the harbinger of their destruction. The very land that they had hoped to claim had claimed them instead. In their arrogance, they had ignored the power of what they could not see, and now it was too late. They had thought the jungle was just a backdrop for war. They had believed that it was theirs to conquer, that it would bend beneath their superior might. But they had underestimated the ingenuity of those who knew how to use it. And so, in the silence that followed, as the last of the enemy's forces retreated, one final truth became clear. The jungle, once thought to be an obstacle, had become the ultimate weapon. And with it, the Allied forces had rewritten the rules of warfare. What had once seemed an impossible venture, a failure waiting to happen, had turned into the decisive force that shattered the Japanese advance. The death trap had claimed its prize, and the invisible had become the most feared weapon of all. They laughed when they first saw it. They stopped laughing when they realized that the sound of their laughter had mingled with the thunder of their defeat. The jungle had spoken, and in the end it was the Allies who held dominion over it. The silence of the land, its once hidden dangers, had become the final judgment, sealing the fate of the enemy. The Pacific skies would never again belong to them. The kill box had been set. The invisible had won. And in that victory, the jungle and the ingenuity of those who fought within it had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not the one you can see, but the one you cannot see.